relationships to Reddit threads. From what the hell do you said what? It's unfiltered, uncut, yeah, that's the show. Yeah, welcome to Let's Be Real, though.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Let's Be Real, though. Podcast and YouTube channel featuring yours truly, me, Brandon. That's right. Now, some of you might be wondering, why is he doing a podcast by himself? Doesn't he have that one with his wife? He does. He really does. And he still does. So if you don't know, I have a podcast with my wife called The Couple That Slays Together. We review horror movies, talk about horror merch, interview celebrities. But for me, there's a couple different reasons why I kind of chose to do the solo route along with our podcast. One of the reasons is I really, a couple reasons actually. As much as I love horror movies, as much as I love my wife, Katie, I really felt like there was just more that I had to say, more that I, just want to come out and talk about and really just have a voice, and not even for the fact that I have to stand for something, but it's more of just wanting to talk. And which leads me kind of to my second point. Writer, director, actor Kevin Smith, right? He became a podcaster probably about 10 to 15 years ago. And, he always said, like, it's the talking cure. And I believed him, but it wasn't like really something that I had found interest in. But, it was interesting because his best friend, Brian Johnson, some of you may have watched Comic Book Man on AMC back when it was on. I know that was came out of the height of Walking Dead and how big that was. But he basically, said that he told his, buddy Brian Johnson, Kevin told Brian that, Brian was going through like a lot of depression. He was saying, I'm considering killing myself. I believe his analogy was, I'm on the stool and I'm ready to just kind of end it all, like hanging himself or whatever. And Kevin told him, start a podcast. And Brian was like, that's your advice? And I'm paraphrasing here. I'm sure it was a much deeper conversation than that. But he said to him, start a podcast, talk about stuff. And so he and Walt Flanagan and Brian Quinn from, Q from Impractical Jokers started a podcast called Tell 'em Steve Dave. And he came back to Kevin and said, you know what, Kev, you're right. I stepped off the stool. And I never really got that. I always heard it, but I never really got how self-curing and self-motivating a podcast could be until I started my own with my wife. And I always used to say, for the few podcasts that I listen to, I usually like the ones that are on YouTube. I usually say, I'll just listen. I'll be a guy that just kind of sits there and listens to, what everybody else has to say. But then, I had people telling me, I really value your opinions on movies, and things in life. You seem to have a pretty level head on stuff. And that's why I started thinking about it. I was like, you know what? My people, and again, not to sound conceited or toot my own horn here, but people enjoy what I have to say. And so why not put out content? You know what I mean? We live in an age where this is the content creation revolution, if you will. And people are constantly doing things on TikTok and YouTube and making all sorts of crazy videos while people doom scroll. And I just felt like this is kind of my time, I'm getting to be almost the age of 40 years old. I'm 38 right now. I turned 39 in September. Right now, I'm currently recording this last day of July 31st. Happy birthday, Mom. Still alive with us, by the way. I pointed up like she was dead, but she's not. She's alive and kicking. So I really felt like it was just kind of my time to put content out. And the kind of content that I want to put out is basically anything and everything. Let's get real. Let's be real about me, for example. My tastes are kind of like all over the place. Yes, obviously a lot of people know me as being a horror guy. Love horror movies. A lot of people know my other kind of side of fandom, which is Power Rangers. I love Power Rangers, grew up watching Power Rangers. watched it for 30 years straight. I shouldn't say straight. That's a lie. Stopped around Lightspeed Rescue. Sorry, Sasha. I stopped initially just because when I was a kid, they took the magic out of it. Like they stopped going, like the previous 2 seasons went to space and they still morphed and they were still secret and nobody knew who they were except for like the teams. And now Lightspeed, like everybody knows who they were and they drove everywhere. They didn't teleport. I know I'm getting off on a tangent. Anyway, so I kind of would pick it up season by season after that. And then, really started getting back into it during the 20th anniversary on. So anyway, so and then I went back and watched a lot of the other seasons. I've seen every episode now. So anyway, getting back on track, and you're going to see me kind of go off on tangents a lot. I have a habit of doing that, but I'm pretty good about getting back on track. Basically, I preach this all the time and it sounds a little hokey, but I'm all about love, man. Like, and I know I have anger issues, but deep down, I really just want to get to the root of things. That's what the basis of this podcast is going to be about. It's basically like, hey, let's be real. Let's break it down. One of my favorite things that one of my favorite people really is Jon Taffer. Jon Taffer, if you don't know, he runs a show or he hosts a show called Bar Rescue, right? And Bar Rescue, basically he goes to like these shit bars, these dive bars, whatever, and he tries to repair them. He goes in, sees where all the problems are, kind of sees them. They don't know he's coming, and they, he comes in and say, hey, and they're like, oh shit. They see him and they're like, oh shit, my bar's about to be rescued or whatever. That they've probably set it up beforehand. I don't know, but anyway, and then, they go through the stress test and, he finds the shit employees or gets, talks to the boss. Sometimes the owner manager is a shitbag and, he's got to get rid of them or, sees that the bar isn't savable or whatever. But one of my favorite things about Bar Rescue, right, is Jon Taffer, when he's got a shitbag for a bar owner or a manager or something, and they're just in the worst mood all the time. They're so shitty about stuff. They're cussing out their employees left and right, whatever. He comes in and, he doesn't bow down to them. He doesn't give in to their anger, but you kind of see it after the stress test. He comes and sits down with that manager and says, or, whatever authority figure and says, what's this really about? What's this really about? Like really just tries to dig deeper into why they're doing the things they are doing and tries to help fix that. Now, the difference between Jon Taffer and I is I'm not trying to fix somebody. There's going to be no judgment, no finger pointing, no, you're doing this wrong. This is how you should be, because I'm just a guy. I'm literally a man who has zero authority. I have zero. I'm not a political person by any means. I just want to be real with people. I just want to get down to brass tacks and say, hey, why are you the way you are? And that's when I say these things, I don't want to judge somebody. I don't want to be like, well, that's wrong. I just said that. But I don't want to tell somebody you're wrong for thinking that, or you should do things this way. Now, they're asking for advice. I'll try to steer them in the right way. I'll try to say things like, hey, you could do it this way. But for the most part, I just want to know how you tick. I want to know what makes you happy. I want to know what pisses you off. I want to know why you do the things you do. Not to invade on your personal life. If there's something you don't want to talk to me about, we don't have to talk about it. But, we're all in this thing together. We're all doing life together. We're all in this community. If you know who I am, you're a part of my community. Whether that's you're one of my closest friends, or we just see each other at a convention every once in a while, or we see each other at work. But either way, you and I have to live in this space, and we've got to treat each other equally and not make somebody feel bad because of how they exist or who they are. And so you're going to see a lot of that on this show. Now, I am also going to be talking about other movies, other TV shows, I'm a huge Michigan football fan, or I'm a huge Detroit Lions fan. I'm from Michigan. Um, I love my Michigan sports teams, but those are the two I really pay attention to. Um, Obviously, I'll pay attention to the Tigers here and there. I love baseball. I grew up a baseball player until about eighth grade or whatever, but I'll get into that soon. Um, but love hockey. I always loved playing hockey video games. Used to watch my best friend play hockey all the time when we were kids. Um, and you know, the Pistons are kind of whatever, and people only like them when they're good. No, I might be wrong about that, but um, hmm. So all that to say, um, you're going to be hearing me talk about other people's artwork, other people's musical abilities, what they like to watch on TV. Um, I might ask about family. I might ask about, hey, I saw you in your darkest hour, or tell me about a time when it was dark, or tell me about your wedding day. Tell me about the happiest day of your life. Tell me about a time when you just felt stuck in life. Tell me about when you were just having a relaxing day and it's your perfect day to be selfish. Things like that. You know what I mean? I just want to know what that looks like to you. And I want us to be able to come to a point where politically, and I don't want to say politically because I'm not a big fan of politics. I know people get after me about saying you really should pay attention to the news, or you really should talk about politics, or you really should do these things. I don't like it because for a couple reasons. I feel like political conversations never actually go anywhere. I feel like they always end up being like both sides think that they're the good guy, right? Everybody thinks that they're trying to be number one and, like whatever. I'm right because of this, or you're wrong because of that. But for me, that's not productive. And, I feel like if you say something, you either aren't educated enough about it, or you're too passionate about it to the point where you can't see where somebody else is coming from. And you will get none of that here. As far as the hate and the your wrongs and this and that. We might figure some things out together. You might disagree with me on something. I might disagree with you on something. I might do something different than you. People might do things differently than me. But at the end of the day, we're still going to be friends. And that's what I hope. That's what I care about is, can we live on this planet? Can we live in this world, have different views, have different opinions, have different desires, but still be a community and still be friends? And I know that might sound a little hokey. That might sound like a hippie and just love each other, man. But there is truth to that. There is truth to living in your community and not having to be an asshole and not having to feel like you're not heard or seen because someone disagrees with you. I'm going to be talking to people. We're going to do some interviews. If you're watching this for the first time, if you're watching this live, like I said, it's August of 2025, basically. My first in-studio interview is going to be John Toohey. John Toohey is going to be here at the end of the month. He's going to come over to my house. We're going to sit down here in the studio and just chat. I'm going to try to dive deep. We've already kind of talked about what we're going to talk about, but, we've got some time. So I thought for this intro episode, because I'm going to be talking to other people, talking about other people's artwork, all these other things, that maybe just for this 0 episode, if you will, that we would just, let's be real with me. But let me tell you where I'm from. Let me tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing. Actually, I probably already kind of did that, but let me just give you a brief history of who I am and what I like and what I do. Now, before I say this too, and habitually, people like my mom and my wife always like to say things like, well, you didn't say that first. You said this other thing first, and you don't make me you don't make the people that you love most a priority, blah, blah, blah. And that's not the case either. Really, when I tell you about myself, I'm kind of just going based on what I can talk about, like, you know what I mean? What just basically dumps into my brain. Um, but I, um, I'm not even gonna worry about it. I'm just gonna tell you about me and try to, um, you know, get through as much as I can. And if I forget something or someone, I apologize. Um, so like I said, I was born September 21st, 1986. Do you remember the 21st night of September? My mother sure does. Uh, um, I was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I was born at Borgess Hospital, um, which is interesting. Recently went back there because we were in a car accident. That's a story from the other day. Happened last November, but wife got to see where I was born, so that was kind of fun. Um, I grew up. I was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, raised in Battle Creek, Michigan. I'm 38 years old. Went to Harper Creek schools. Go Beavers. I went to Beetle Lake Elementary School, Harper Creek Junior High, and Harper Creek High School. We were the first class to graduate out of the current high school, and our old high school became the junior high, or the middle school, if you will. I guess it's middle school now. Also went to the Calhoun Area Technology Center. Now it's the Calhoun Area Career Center. Excuse me. Calhoun Area Career Center now is what it's called. Went there and studied graphic design. And I have been a graphic designer professionally for a good 20 to 23 years now. Just kind of depends on where you consider professional. But I went there when I was 16, went there for my junior, senior year. Was never really into sports in school. I was more of a church kid. Grew up in the Christian, the Wesleyan denomination. But before I move on with that, I just want to say here too, because I grew up in the church, because I grew up a Christian, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to force Christian beliefs or anything on somebody. I have actually very much changed and kind of, I don't want to say gotten out of church. I haven't been back to church in probably 5 to 10 years. It's been a while. And that again might be a story for another day, but I have my reasons. But still respect anybody who's in the church. Well, I shouldn't say anybody. Still respect a lot of people in the church. I get where they're coming from. I get some of the stuff, but at the same time, for me, I just at this current moment, it's hard for me to find love in a church when there's so many people out there hurting and suffering, and I just want to be a friend to everybody, and I never want to give off a stereotype, and I hope I haven't. But at the same time, again, basically the way I look at faith now is, for me, it's my own personal faith. I would hope that people don't put me in a box, like, oh, he is a Christian, so he must be ignorant and hates people that are gay or the LGBTQ community and must do all these things and whatever. And it's just, that's the biggest thing I want to get into here is I never want to put somebody in a box, nor do I want to be put in a box, because I very much, and it's a big reason why I'm explaining where I came from. I have a cousin who is gay, and I don't want this to just be one of those like stories. Well, my friend's gay, so you might as well whatever. No, I grew up helping my cousin as an ally figure out her sexuality. She would come to me all the time saying, "Hey, do you think this guy's cute?" And I would say, "No, not necessarily." Like, but I could tell she was trying to figure out, like, when she was asking me these things, she was really trying to see, hey, do you feel the same way that I feel? And, over time she would say, oh, I just think girls are really, really cute, to, oh, I kind of like girls, to, oh, I like girls and I like guys. And then she realized, through just being able to talk to me, mostly me and her mom, but it was me first, I think, but, mostly my aunt. But really, I remember when she realized, like, oh, I'm gay. And it's like, okay, and I supported her and was very supportive through that. And still to this day, never saw her any differently. Never thought she was weird. I was very accepting. So just want to clear that out of the way before we move on. But also grew up next to a cop. And so I definitely respect police officers. My best friend's dad, growing up, was a police officer. God rest his soul. He passed away probably about gosh, when was that? I want to say about 8 years ago. It could be different. Sorry if I'm forgetting. But grew up next to a cop. And the same cousin, by the way, that I was talking about. Her mom, my aunt, my dad's sister, uh, married a black man, so it was a biracial family. So I got a little bit more culture than say like your average white guy would. Um, so I grew up in a lot of different environments. I grew up in a church, but then I grew up, with a biracial family, but with, LGBTQ cousin, and with a police officer for a neighbor. So, I've gotten to know like a lot of different cultures and, learn to abolish stereotypes and just see people for who they are. And that's what I want to highlight here on this show. Um, so anyway, getting back to kind of me and where I come from, got my sister Amanda. She is 2 years younger than me, so she is turning 37 this month, actually, the 26th, and I am turning 39 in September. So 37, 39, we're 2 years apart, about 21 months or something. But we weren't very close as kids. Not as kids. As teenagers, we kind of ran in the same circles because we went to the same youth group. But and then eventually she started hanging out with more people from school, and I still continue to have those guys in my life at youth group, who actually two of them are still my best friends to this day. Um, but let's see. So was heavily involved in music and in singing at church. I was one of the singers for the band. Ended up being the lead singer of the band when I was a senior in high school. And really just loved music. Learned how to play guitar initially in high school. And I never really was great at singing and playing at the same time. So guitar was more of a hobby for me. There was a couple times when I played on stage live, but not too often. So anyway, got 60 college credits just out of high school. I was pretty adamant that I wanted to be a worship pastor. I still remember the day. It was interesting. I remember the day when I said to myself, because they offered, when we were sophomores, we were offered a tour of the vocational center that I was telling you about, the Calhoun Area Technology Center. They were offering us tours of the place. You could pick two classes to see if it's something you wanted to do. And I said, well, I've got my whole life kind of set up. At that point, I knew I wanted to be a music pastor, and I knew I wanted to go to Indiana Wesleyan University. Because that was like the headquarters for Wesleyan kids. We were like that was like the goal for everybody. And I want to say 3 of us ended up going there, which the other, like one of them dropped out mid-semester, like the first year. So only 2 of them graduated from there. But anyway, so I had it pretty much made up in my mind. Yeah, I'm going to Indiana Wesleyan. So I don't even know why I would even entertain going to this vocational center tour. But I chose to, and I think the first class I checked out was electronics, and then the second one was graphic design. And I ended up falling in love with it. And I said, well, I still could do the music stuff. I'll still be going to church. I could just do this, and then I could just do the graphic design thing, get some college credits, and do that. So, but my senior year, when I realized Indiana Wesleyan was not going to be the avenue for me, started looking elsewhere. Started looking at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. I went down there my senior year. My spring break of my senior year. Took a bus down there. I don't really remember the bus ride. I just remember it was long. But pretty much thought and decided I was going to go there. Only time I've ever been to Oklahoma. And I got to experience a tornado when I was there. So that was interesting. But ultimately, just with financial aid and the way it worked out, I was not able to attend. And so I was not able to do the Westland thing. And so the semester after I graduated high school, I remember that was one of the times I felt the most lost because, well, what am I going to do? So I started going to KCC, Kellogg Community College, started going there. A lot of my friends had left. The only one that was left was Mike Davis, who ended up being my best man later on and still my best friend today. One of them. And so, he and I were both kind of in this stage of, what do we do now? Our friends are gone. We're too old for youth group. What do we do? So took a semester off. I worked somewhere. I don't remember where I was working at the time. I think I might have been at the Family Christian Bookstore at that point. Maybe Steak and Shake. I don't remember. I don't know. I've had so many jobs. Like, I don't even remember everywhere I've worked. I know that sounds really bad, but just, whatever. Part-time jobs through school and all that. I was at Cousin Subs. That's where I was at. Cousin Subs by Harbor Creek. Not open anymore. Anyway, so I decided to go back to KCC and or go to KCC. Well, go back to KCC because I did some KCC classes in high school, so it was like going back. So anyway, from there, I met the first girl I ever loved. Her name was Jessica. We dated for a little bit. Didn't end up working out, and that's a story for another day. We're still kind of friends. Maybe I'll have her on here one day, and we can talk about that. But anyway, so got through my 20s. There was a point, I was, when I hit 21, I was really into drinking, really out into the bar scene. I was working at Office Max at the time. I started working at Office Max 2007. Made a lot of really good lifelong friends there. Sometimes I miss working there. I miss working with some friends, and I don't miss it like I have regrets. It was one of the better jobs. Worked there for 2 years. Worked for a guy by the name of Mike Perez, who was a groomsman at my wedding. And he is still a really good friend of mine today. One of the best bosses I've ever had, if not the best boss. But so I was working there, and that was where that Office Max was a huge chapter in my life for many reasons. One of the reasons was it's where I learned to gain self-confidence in myself. In high school, I never had a girlfriend because I was just so afraid to talk to girls. I was afraid of rejection. And as good of friends as my friends still are, guys like to ball bust each other. They like to crack at each other. And that was really hard for me in the long run because I didn't have any confidence in myself. I'm a big guy. I was smaller than this. I was not confident in myself because I felt that I was too fat. When I look back at pictures, I was like, my God, I wish I could get back to that weight. But, working in Office Max really, I met people there. I met a guy named Raven, and Raven helped me find my confidence. He helped me talk to women. He helped me make friends. He helped me talk to people. He helped me realize that, hey, you're just trying to figure your life out like everybody else, and he mentored me. It wasn't like the ball busting where it's like, you'll never get her. It was more of like, dude, go talk to her. That was the difference. I mean, you'd be surprised how much difference encouragement in your life can bring you because of insecurities that you have. And so that really did something in me that helped me. But anyway, I was drinking pretty heavily, during that time, like not, I'd say socially, like we had like, we'd go out to the bar on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Fridays and Saturdays. That's a 38-year-old man. That sounds like a lot. I can't even imagine going out 2 nights in a row right now. Like, I don't know. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I do miss my buddies. I haven't really talked to them. I don't talk to them as much as I used to, but, um, that just feels like a lot of time to be going out and drinking. Like, I could not imagine these days even drinking once a week, let alone 4 times a week. And I wouldn't always get trashed, but there were some times when I got pretty trashed. So anyway, yeah, so I got to a point where, I wasn't working at Office Max anymore. This was like 2009 now. And I am just trying to figure out, okay, 23 years old. I'm kind of past the honeymoon stage of being 21. I got to make something of my life. And so I ended up going, you know, it- getting kind of back into church and getting back into my faith. And this is where, like, my good buddy Chris Jakeway came in, because he was always kind of a personal mentor and hero to me, and still is. But he was all about, like, apologetics, and he is a professor at KCC, Kellogg Community College, and he's the philosophy department, basically, and he teaches 5 classes there. He teaches philosophy, ethics. Well, he did when I was there. I think he does 4 now. I think so. He had world religions, and then he had cults and new religious movements, and I think they combine now. But then he did survey the Bible, and so what I really liked about Chris Jakeway's teachings is he's not a feelings teacher. He is an evidence supporting apologetics type of guy. And intellect has always been like a big deal to me, like being able to have an intelligent conversation, being able to speak rationally, without emotion, or, with little emotion, not clouding your brain with like I feels, the feels or whatever. So there was he presented the Bible and, a lot of other things like ethics and philosophy and such as objectively as he could, but also like he presented things about ethics and about philosophy of, hey, here's what this side believes and here's what that side believes. The truth is somewhere in the middle, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and he a lot more complex teachings than that, but ultimately, that's where I kind of got that mentality. But I was really hardcore into it. And so I decided I wanted to get a 4-year degree in philosophy. This was where I really went off my path. Not that I don't enjoy these things now. I do. I love it. But it's not something that I want to do as a career necessarily. But at that time I did. And so I basically wasted a year. I was 24 years old at this point. I went to Spring Arbor University, where I study under Chris Jakeway's mentor, Chuck Campbell. Chuck Campbell, he's like the real life looking Jurassic Park dude. But at no expense. Looks just like him. Chuck, I took his I feel like it was a philosophy class. It might have been a religion class. I can't remember. I took his class, and I remember I wrote a paper. Now, at this point, I hadn't done an English class in a long time. I had, I'm pretty good with it now, but at that point, I, kind of drank away a lot of things. And so I relied heavily on sources and Wikipedia and all these things. And I can remember turning in a couple of papers, and Chuck sat me down and he said, "Look, this is a great paper." He said, "This is not your work. This is somebody else's work." And I could tell. And this thing that you're doing, like, at the time, this really hit me hard. But he set me back on my path. He looks at me and he says, "This isn't you. This whole thing, it's not what you're meant to be." And at first, it crushed me. I was like, A, I just wasted 3 years of my life trying to figure this out, trying to be this thing that I'm not. And B, it's like, but I look up to you and I look up to Chris and I want to be the next you. And I realize becoming who I am isn't the next them. I got to walk my own path. I've got to be my own person, and I can enjoy this stuff as a hobby, but this isn't what I'm meant to be doing as a career. And that's when I led. The Spring Arbor was in Jackson. It's about 35 minutes from my hometown. Moved home. Moved back with my dad for nope, nope. Moving back with my dad for a year. That came before that. After that, um, I moved in with some guys, lived in their basement, and I had hit rock bottom, or at least one of my points of rock bottom. I hit rock bottom. The guy who owned the house, he sprayed, he would spray like pesticides out in his yard to get pests away. But I was living in his basement, and literally all the fleas and bugs, they would came down in my basement. So I mean, it was literally the worst time of my life. And I can remember Alex Lee, my other best friend, the three, Mike Davis, and myself, the three of us are like really close. He's like, dude, you gotta get off your ass. You gotta figure this out, man. You gotta figure life out. And so one day I was kind of just dinking around on Facebook, and this was in end of 2011. I'm dinking around and I see a guy. He's on Facebook, and I knew him through a friend. This is why I give so much credit to Office Max, because I wouldn't have met this guy if I hadn't worked there. This guy lived in Indianapolis. It was a graphic designer. Saw it in his little like about me or whatever. And I messaged him. I said, "Hey man, by chance, are you guys looking for any graphic designers where you're working?" He says to me, "Yeah, we're actually looking for a 7-month seasonal designer just to kind of help us out with things we got to get done. And I'm looking for a roommate." I said, "Well, shit. I mean, if this isn't, whatever God's path or whatever, or my own, just kind of way of thinking, whatever," I said, this opportunity is like yelling at me and I have to go. And so I left home. Where I'm from, Battle Creek, Michigan, and surrounding areas, it's really hard to get a job as a graphic designer because where I'm from, we invented cereal, and it's a huge manufacturing town. So it's rough. It is really rough to get a job there if you're wanting to be a graphic designer. It sucks. Not gonna lie. So, you got to be really lucky. I mean, if you're going to be a designer at Kellogg, that's like one job out of like however many designers that are going to school there. And so, I jumped at the opportunity. I moved to Indianapolis, and I moved there in 2012, July 2012. Lived with him for a little while. Worked at the place for a little while. There's another aspect of that story that was interesting that I'll maybe share later. So basically, like I said, hadn't found a church, and I wasn't really interested in church at that point. And at that point I was like 26, I think. 27, 20, no, I would have been about 25, I think. Anyway, I don't know, mid-20s. And I go down there, or I come down here, and so I joined the dating apps and get on Plenty of Fish, OkCupid, those ones. Those are the big ones at the time. And I'm just kind of bored sitting there watching TV, and there's a thing on Plenty of Fish you can set up on your thing. You could, at the time, I haven't used it in a long time. I don't even know if it exists anymore, but it might. But I just remember looking at it, and it was like it would show you women, and it would be like, "Do you want to meet this person?" And you'd click no or yes. And you would just literally hit yes, and it would automatically send them like an automated message that you have set up, or that Plenty of Fish sets up for you or something. And so literally I was like, you know what? I'm just going to sit here and hit the yes button on everybody, not even look. And if somebody's interested in me, if they message me back and say, "Hey, want to chat or whatever," then so be it. So I sit there for about 20 to 30 minutes, just literally just hitting the same button. Like, I'm not even looking at my phone. Literally, I've got it in my hand, and I'm just watching TV, right? And so a couple hours go by, maybe a day, and I get two responses. A girl from far East Ohio, and then I get a message from a girl named Katie, and really cute, says, hey, I see that your screen name, my email address and screen name at the time was Kal-El-of-Krypton@yahoo.com. So Kal-El of Krypton, and I spelled it Kallel of Krypton. She's messaged me back, says, hey, that's Superman. I know Superman. And I was like, oh, cool. Nerdy girl. So we talk and meet and go on our first date and everything. Actually, no, we were supposed to go on our first date. This would have been Thanksgiving week of that week, because it was around Thanksgiving, because our dating anniversary is November 27th. I remember my mom and dad came down. It was the only time my dad ever came to visit. My mom and dad came down for Thanksgiving that year, had dinner with my roommate and I and his family and such, and we kind of had a blended Thanksgiving that year. And Katie and I were supposed to meet that Black Friday. We'd been talking about meeting all week, but, there was different holiday stuff, and she kind of has her own side of that story, which I don't feel comfortable telling. She had some stuff going on. So she had gotten sick. I thought she was kind of blowing me off, but I remember, that Sunday I was kind of like, at this point we had texted and talked a lot, and I remember at that Sunday I was saying to her, I said, look, if you're sick, I get it, like, whatever, but do you think we can still spend time together? I'll bring you some Sprite, some crackers, whatever, make you feel better. I said, yeah, fine, whatever. And it's really funny, like, because I didn't know it at the time, but I found out literally a year later that she had a kitchen knife in the couch, just in case. Which I still give her crap, and I feel comfortable saying this now because we've been married for going on 11 years. But we hooked up that night. It's our joke. Like, we say, hey, what was it? Was it your first date, your first kiss, first time you had sex? And it's like, yeah, that whole thing from Friends. I don't know if you've ever seen that episode. Phoebe did the same thing, but with Mike. But we both were, but it's just funny. It's like, well, wait a minute, like, you and I hooked up. Like, why did you have a knife? Like, I don't know, in case you attacked me, whatever. So, we dated from 2014. I'm sorry, 2014. No, that's when we got married. We dated. I asked her to marry me August of 2013, and we got married in October 4th of 2014. And like I said, we've been together since then. So it's 2025. So it's been together for 12 years. But anyway, so around that time, when I was living here in Indianapolis, just because, again, Michigan, we're kind of just in that mitten, and at that point, conventions and such were rare. I wouldn't say rare, but they're not as popular as they are now. Comic-Cons and such. And I remember going to my first convention was Motor City Comic-Con 2012. I met Dean Cain, Elena Huffman, who played Black Canary in Smallville. She was also Abaddon in Supernatural. I met Yvonne Craig, I think was her name, Batgirl from the old show. And then who did I meet? There was another one. Dean Cain. I met Dean Cain that convention. That was my first, like, autographs. I remember taking, like, all 4 of my Lois and Clark DVD sets, and I took, like, my poster and such, because I didn't know that you had to pay per signature. I thought it was like you paid for one and then, like, you got everything you wanted signed, and I quickly found out that was not the case. I remember meeting Tom Savini at that con too, like, for the first time, because he was playing baseball with a kid. I don't know if it was his nephew or somebody else's kid or whatever, but I remember saying, hey, really loved In for Dust Till Dawn. And he just kind of we've interacted several times then or since then. But he excuse me, so I'd done that, before I moved, but really, I started meeting Power Rangers. Again, this is where I started, my love for Power Rangers kind of came back, was because, again, 20th anniversary, plus when you start meeting people, and it's like you become this big community, like it's just a big thing. And so I remember meeting Walter Jones, and, let me rewind this. So when I went to Wizard World, something or other, with my friend Brandon Whitmore. Brandon Whitmore was my first friend here. We literally met 24 hours of me living in Indianapolis. And he's been my friend ever since. I remember he and I got really excited because we went to Wizard World and we met the writer. He invented Impulse Flash. He ended up, he wrote a bunch of stuff, but he was living in Muncie, actually where I work now. He was living in Muncie. He was dating our friend Christy, and we kind of just were like, "Would you want to have lunch sometime?" He was like, "Yeah, sure." So we were just very surprised that he said yes, and so that was kind of where I was like, "Well, it never hurts to ask." That's kind of where I first had that confidence to ask things. And so when I started doing more of the conventions, I started to meet my heroes, Power Rangers went on. Walter Jones, the original Black Power Ranger, I met him, and I had this really neat idea for a vanity shirt. Now, a vanity shirt, when you're, watching a movie or a TV show or, and there's like a restaurant, like the one I always go use the example of is Breaking Bad, right? Target and Hot Topic and all these stores, when that show was popular, they had Los Palos Hermanos, or whatever the restaurant was called, where Gus worked, and they had a lot of those shirts there. And so I had, like, you see like Star Laboratories, right? Like from The Flash. You see like all these things that exist inside or would exist inside of a fictional universe. That's what I mean by a vanity shirt. And so I had seen a lot of these around, and I was like, it'd be kind of neat if there was a Power Rangers one. And I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, in the show, Zach Taylor, the Black Ranger, Walter Jones, Zach he teaches Hapkido, hip hop Kido. It's like a dance mixture with, martial arts. And so I had this idea. I did this like cool, like logo. I presented it to him, and we had a conversation about it 2 days later. And I was actually surprised he called me. And I said, "Yeah, man, I've got this design idea." It was a shirt called. It said Zachary Taylor School for Hip Hop Kido, and then it had like one of his like phrases like funkier music, cool dance moves, whatever. And so at that time, he really liked it, and he sold that shirt at conventions for about a year. And so then he started to ask me like, "Hey, you're a good designer, and I wasn't that great at the time, but he's like, would you be interested in making graphics flyers for me, like, promotions for when I go to these different cons and such?" I said, "Yeah, love to." And so, I would do those for him a lot. And then, as I, would go to the cons, I'd get recommended by his agent. Austin St. John, the original Red Ranger, was coming back from the military at that time. And I started making flyers for him, making some prints for him. David Yost, Karen Ashley, Catherine Sutherland. It just like kept snowballing until I had this huge design clientele of people. And ended up meeting Michael Buoni, Buoni, who owns and runs Ranger Stop, Orlando in Florida, biggest Power Ranger convention on the East Coast. And at that time it was 2015. And he said, "Hey, I'm looking for someone, potentially to do some website work for me. And, would you be interested, doing art?" Because at that point, I think he was using a guy out of Brazil or something, and he was always busy with other stuff. So I started doing stuff for him, and that's when really things took off. And that's when I joined the kind of the Ranger Stop family. Their third year. We're going on our 10th year now. And So when it got to be fast forward to 2019, now in that spectrum, in that span, I had been doing um volunteering at cons. I'd been doing, I had been doing all sorts of like guest handling. I do flyer work for other clients, other people like Noel Neal. Nope, Noel, not Noel Neal. Noel, no, no. What was that woman's name? I'm sorry, I'm blanking right now. Um, well, I would do stuff for like Peter Mayhew. I would do stuff for like Nichelle Nichols. That was her name. I would do things for Vern Troyer. I mean, there were so many different people I would do artwork for, different flyers for. Um, and while this was all happening in my day job life, I had gotten a job. I worked at Yellow Pages for 3 years, from 2013 to 2016. Got downsized pretty bad there. And then, I was a part of the big downsizing. We were already an outsource from Canada, and they decided to double outsource to India. So, because it was like a third of the cost of what they were paying us. And then I went on to Gannett. Was Gannett next? I think Gannett was next. And they go through downsizings all the time. I mean, they hire people, fire people, hire people, fire people. It's like when things are good, they hire people. When things are bad, they fire people. I mean, it's like literally a quarterly thing. Corporate America can just really suck like that sometimes. And then I was working for a company called Etching Industries. They were based out of Chicago, but they had a plant here. They decided to move everything back to Itasca, which was a city outside of that. And so I got really tired of design at that point in my day job stuff. And it's like, I'm having more fun doing the other design work, just in my own personal stuff, doing flyers and prints for actors and Power Rangers and everything. So I took a couple of years off design, worked for a couple of like dealer service corporation companies, whatever. But anyway, in my time of growth with Ranger Stop and with doing things with different Power Rangers, Mikey asked me at one point, this was 2019, early 2019, he says, "Hey, what do you think we could do to, grow the show? What can we do to make this more original and separates us from other shows and whatnot?" And I said, "Well, look, dude," I said, the show, the show moved production from the United States to New Zealand in season 11. Disney bought it. They did the first season. They transitioned like mid-season 10, Wild Force. They were kind of there. That's when that whole thing was. That's why you don't hear a lot of much of a score during the fights. I mean, it's really weird how you can watch Wild Force and they'll be fighting bad guys, but there's like no music playing, and it's just the hell. Anyway, they moved production to New Zealand back in during season 11, season 10, season 11. And so from season 11 to season 30, they had all these New Zealand, Australian actors that Americans haven't had a chance to meet at the regular convention circuit. And, actors like Kat Sutherland, Jason Font, Nakia Burrese, a lot of these guys, they did U.S. tours and American tours, but fans have met them. They'd met them several times. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying anything bad about them, but really to set ourselves apart, I said to Mikey, why don't we pull together some folks, who maybe have like $200-300, and why don't we like put together like a thing to bring over international guests. And so we ended up bringing, he liked the idea, and we got such a great response from it. Not only did we bring 4, we brought 8. And so 8 New Zealanders came up, New Zealand, Australian cast members came up for that Ranger Top 7. That was the 7th event in 2019. And one of those Ranger actors, which I was actually quite surprised that he even answered my message, because he's such a, like, he's done so much work since then, was John Toohey. And John Toohey, I remember reaching out to him and thinking that he wouldn't even answer. And I still remember our first kind of Instagram interaction. I could feel like he was testing me. I could feel like he was like kind of big boying me a little bit, It's like, dude, I did. I got fat. I got Hobbs and Shaw coming out, right? I got. I was in Star Wars and Hobbit, right? Yeah, man. Love it. Love that you're doing that. But it really took that first video chat with John. John is not uh, a guy that just texts or a guy that just talks on the phone. No, he likes to be personal. And so he and I video chatted a lot. We still do all the time. And so he learned, that was the thing for he keeps his circle small, and he definitely welcomed me into his circle. It took a little bit, but so, we became friends through that. And ultimately at that point, he said to me, why aren't you a booking agent? You're really, you rounded us up really good. Like, why don't you do this as a job? And I said, well, I never really thought about it. I worked for several agents and did flyers for them and volunteered for their people. And I guess I could. And so what happens after 2019, right? COVID hits. I still remember when I first heard about COVID. I remember hearing about this virus across this the waters or whatever. Oh, it's happening in Europe. It's happening here. It's happening in China. Whatever. I still remember like going to an Alter Bridge concert, thinking, "Are we still gonna be able to do this? Like, I hope it doesn't get canceled or whatever." And I still remember being at C2E2 that year. And I still remember David Yost. I was hanging out with David Yost and Walter Jones. I was helping them out their table. I still remember David Yost saying, "Oh, first case of COVID in the U.S., Washington, Seattle." Oh, shit, it's here. And then soon after, what happened? The world was history. So at that time, agents and conventions weren't conventions weren't happening. Agents were afraid to say and send their people places. But comic book stores were still open. They were still trying to survive. And, once we got past the initial lockdown and everything, and stuff was starting to open back up with masks and everything, I remember it was still 2020. People were wanting to work. They were wanting to make money. And the traditional agents of the conventions were like, yeah, no way. But a lot of my friends who were Power Ranger actors, they were like, dude, can you, hook me up with some of your people? And, can you get me into some stores? Because we found out there's a formula, and Steve Cardenas really was like the flagship guy to do this. He and Jason Font both, and Jason David Frank, the three of those guys. The biggest thing that we figured out with the comic book stores and the signings was that you kind of got a different demographic of people. If you think about it, if you've ever been to a Comic-Con or a pop culture event, think about how much you have to go through. I mean, you have to figure out parking, a lot of times it's in a bigger city like Cincinnati or Chicago or whatever. You got to find a parking garage to park in. It's a pain in the ass. And then you got to walk however many blocks. You got to get your badges. You got to get your wristbands. You got to, you got to go to this big venue. You got to find where the celebrities are. You got to hurry up and get there. And then after, you got to buy these expensive tickets. Do I get a full weekend pass? Do I get just a day? Am I supposed to cosplay? I see a lot of people cosplaying. Why am I not in costume? All these different things that you just don't think about that are really a big deal. I'm thinking C2E2. I'm thinking the huge cons, Whereas with these comic book stores, you're telling me that I can just walk into my local shop and there's a Power Ranger? Hell yeah, I'd much rather do that. Why haven't we thought of this before? Why haven't we been doing this? And so that was kind of a game changer. And so now, fast forward to 2025 when the world's kind of gone back to being something else, normal. I don't want to say normal because we obviously didn't go back to normal, but we found a new normal. Now we have both Comic-Cons and store signings, and that's been cool. So anyway, I started my own booking agency at that point in 2019, and I started my own. Basically, let me take that back. I turned my graphic design business into a design and production company, with production being the designs, the booking stuff. But I also started my own foundation. I started the Ranger Sponsors International, where we basically, like I said, bring Power Ranger actors from other countries and bring them to the States. Or we'll send them from the States and go to other countries. Started all that. And I'm getting to, I think, the end of that journey. This isn't an announcement or anything. And I've still got some time. I've done significantly less this year, um, than I have with the conventions and everything, than I had. Like I travel to so many different cities, for these shows, and I've only done like 5 this year. But like I said, I'm getting closer to 40, so I'm starting to kind of have other interests and, just try to do different things in life. And podcasting is one of them. My wife and I started the Couple That Slays Together this year. Horror has always been a big thing for me, but it really grew on me in this past 5 years or so. Huge fan of it. Huge fan of Ninja Turtles. Huge fan of again, Ranger still. But all that to say, that's really kind of my history in a nutshell. I'm sure there's several other friend groups I could talk about. I didn't even mention, I mentioned growing up next to Chris, my buddy Chris Scoter, still one of my closest friends today. Haven't seen him as much. He's about ready to have another kid. And lives about an hour north of where we're from. So, but still on great terms. Still, try to chat, once a month or so. But I don't see him as often as I see, like, say, Mike or Alex. Would love to see him more. I'm just trying to think of some other randoms about me. I have a really big autograph collection. I love getting autographs. Maybe on one of these episodes, I'll show you kind of my things I like to get signed and different things. Yeah, I'll do an episode like that. But ultimately, what to expect from the show is, we're going to be talking to people and just really getting deep. Whether that's celebrities, whether that's family, my family, whether that's friends that I barely know, whether it's friends I've known for years. I just want to talk to people. Other episodes might be sharing my views, like my first official, my episode 1 is just going to be talking about July movies. Familiar, but not just talking about horror movies. I'm going to talk about every movie that came out in July. Well, movies that I saw in July anyway, the ones. But going to give a little review on those just to kind of keep it familiar, but then, away from horror a little bit, even though I am going to talk about I Know What You Did Last Summer, 2025, and Dangerous Animals, and Megan 2.0. But all that to say is I really just wanted to start this platform for me to just be able to talk, because I really do feel like it is therapeutic to kind of pour your heart out on a podcast and to just get it out there. Just talk about what you want to talk about. It literally is the talking cure. And again, the onion that is Brandon Benfield will definitely be peeling back and unfolding as we go through these, because I will talk about myself a little bit. I will have episodes where it's just me sitting here talking to you. Some people might be here in studio, some people might be over a streaming platform where we just chat. But ultimately, I just want to be real. I just want to get real with you guys. I just want to be real about myself. I want to be real about the people that are on the show. And I want this to be entertaining. I want this to be something you enjoy listening to and watch. And I know that my wife and I's podcast, The Couple That Slays Together, isn't necessarily for everybody, because we're talking about horror and such, which is okay. I get that. But this is just a chance for me to be transparent. This is a chance for me to talk to people who I wouldn't normally talk to, ask them questions about their life, and just kind of give my views and takes on stuff. And, my views and opinions are my own. I would never encroach on somebody else's life or, put it in their head that they're wrong. That's not who I am. And that's not who I'm here to be. Again, I just want to know how you work. I want to know how you tick. And I just want to be real with you. So I think that's going to do it for today. But I appreciate you watching and listening. I'm sure at some point I'll figure out an ending tagline, but thanks for being real with me. That's what I'll say. Let's be real. Thanks for being real.
It's all